Christ, in his perfect humanity, could not pour equal amounts of energy into everyone he drew around him. No leader should expect to be able to do that. The 12 were an amazingly varied group. Their personalities, interests up the spectrum. The four in Group 1 seemed to be the only tied together by common denominators. They were all four fishermen. They were two sets of brothers. They came from the same community, and they had apparently all been friends for a long time. By contrast, Matthew was a tax collector and a loner. Simon was a zealot, a political activist, and a different kind of loner. All the others all came from unknown occupations. They all had vastly differing personalities. Peter was eager, aggressive, bold, and outspoken with a habit of revving his mouth, while his brain was in neutral. I'm gonna finish the chapter and then Veer, if you want, you can take over. Um, while brain was in neutral, I have often referred to him as the apostle with a foot-shaped mouth. John, on the other hand, spoke very little. In the first 12 chapters of Acts, he and Peter were constant companions, but no words of John are ever recorded. Bartholomew, also known sometimes as Nathaniel, was a true believer, openly confessing his faith in Christ and quick to have faith. Reference John 1:47 through 50. Significantly, he is in the same group and sometimes paired with Thomas, who was an outspoken skeptic and a doubter and wanted to have proof for everything.
Um, what stood out to me so far was what you were reading earlier about John, Peter, James, and John, how they were like the closest of the close to Jesus, and how they were there during the transfiguration and him crying out to God. I don't know if you remember. Uh, Pastor Luke was speaking about um, the mountain of just the Garden of Gesseration when Gethsemane. There it is. Um, he was talking about how just crying out and everything, like how Jesus like had his kind of human moment, and it's just like them three being there just like stands out a lot to me because like they're ordinary men. This like they are the 12 ordinary men. You know what I mean? So it's just like them being there when Jesus was like having a ordinary men moment, crying out to God like we do nowadays when we need Him is just like I feel like powerful, like you know. hmm And they were there, like that was. hmm
I was just about to mention that. I remember you saying something about that, Isaiah, when they were falling asleep. Like you were saying that Jesus went ahead and said, "Hey, stay steadfast," don't fall asleep. But even though that he told them exactly to fall asleep, not fall asleep, that they still did, and that could be seen as the folly of the flesh.
He would want his most closest brothers with him. Yeah, literally the one thing he asked they couldn't do. hmm
That that was a really good point that you brought up, Mikey. Alonzo, you had something?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the list, um, and the thing that really caught me off the most is it's interesting to see Judas at the bottom at every list. Only well, Judas Iscariot, right? Because Judas is spoken about so much in churches, um, in literature, right? Because Judas is a well-known person if you're in the Christian world or you're in the secular world, right? People call people Judases all the time when whether it's through lying or backstabbing or corrupt, money hungry, it's just a saying, right? I didn't think he was gonna be at the bottom of every list, genuinely. It kind of changes the narrative and the idea that I had pictured in my head of Judas all like throughout my life of reading the Bible. I thought he'd be a lot higher on the list, if I'm being honest.
I can see what you're saying with that one as well too, because essentially it's like save the best for last, but the last is Judas, right?
Right.
And the thing is, we remember him most by his misdeeds, but I think in that sense, it's actually is the adverse effect of the good deeds, because like the misgivings that he brought upon us, or brought upon Jesus, allows us to have that tale of fair warning. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, bro. Yeah, just to piggyback off what you were saying, um, like this descending list. I mean, if we weren't reading the book, I don't think any of us would be like, I wonder from 1 through 12 what the disciples would be, So it's really interesting. And Matthew being low, like lower than what I thought he'd be, but below Philip, Bartholomew, and Thomas in Matthew in the book that he wrote. You know what I mean? Like that's that also surprised me.
Oh, I just have a question. It's like all the disciples had their good deeds and stuff and whatnot, and Judas was the only one to like really portray Jesus in a big way that we still point out today. It just I think it's crazy, even though he was a disciple for X amount of how long, you know what I mean? Like it is crazy. Oh, he did one big bad deed and straight to the bottom of the list, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Another thing about Judas is that he was by what the disciples considered savvy and like financially organized. He had the mentality of a businessman, right? He was always looking to make an extra dollar. It would hurt him physically to see things being misused. I think when we open the Gospels and we read about the perfume, the expensive perfume that the woman used to clean Jesus's feet, right? He had a whole like, oh my gosh, like we could have sold that and we could have used it to for ministry purposes or so on and so forth. You know what I mean? Um, I feel like when you really think about it, his heart was always towards the extra buck, right? And it's interesting because you kind of like flash forward it, and like I think Judas would have loved living in capitalism the way we do now in like modern America. Because bro, I'm not gonna lie, like he was a very financially savvy person at the time, and it's almost like our society has almost become normalized like Judas's mentality towards things. Like, oh, like I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna, buy the homeless guy food, or I'm not going to, pitch in $20 to buy, somebody's birthday cake, or things like that, right? Because like, it's my money. I worked hard for it. I feel like Judas, our generation has a very similar mindset to what Judas had. Capitalism, Western civilization, and it's normalized now. So.
Can I say something to that?
Mhm.
So I don't know if you guys seen Survivor, but
In bits and pieces.
yeah, it's not too important. But I think the main thing to understand from that point is that he didn't work well within the group in that sense, where he was able to form bonds and continue going to achieve the goal, the consensus goal, you know. So and I understand where you're coming from with the business ideas and his business savviness, but I don't think he would survive in the modern day intrapersonal perspective of it, because essentially he did betray the 12, or I guess you could say the 12 people, I'm not sure, but the 11 people that he was with to follow Christ. So there is room for doubt in that, but I totally understand where you're coming from, and I feel like we can't put Judas on a pedestal in that sense, because he would do really good in today's day and age because he was business savvy. If you understand where I'm coming from.
What I meant to say, obviously, yeah, to your point, the interpersonal, connection. I agree with that. He was, from what I've read, he was very closed off from the group, like not really intimate with the majority of the guys or the disciples. Um, my main focus on what I said was he would have loved to live in capitalism, modern Western civilization. I don't know how good of a businessman he would have been, but
I see, my bad.
yeah. No, but to your point, I agree with that. I agree with the personal part. Yeah, if we're done with the quarter review, we can keep reading if you guys want.
Or just want to make sure we're on page 32 on the second paragraph. All right. Forgive me if I make mistakes, please. Their political backgrounds were different too. Matthew, the former tax collector, who was sometimes called Levi, was considered one of the most despicable people in Israel before Jesus called him. He had taken a job with the Roman government to extort taxes from his own people, and that tax money went to pay for the Roman occupation army. The lesser of the two Simons, on the other hand, is called the Zealot. In Luke 6:15 and Acts 1:13, Zealots were an outlaw political party who took their hatred of Rome to an extreme and conspired to overthrow Roman rule. Many of them were violent outlaws. Since they did not have an army, they used sabotage and assassination to advance their political agenda. They were in effect terrorists. One faction of the Zealots was known as Sicarii, literally daggermen. Because of the small curved blade they carried, they concealed those weapons beneath their robes and used them to dispatch people they perceived as political enemies. People liked tax collectors. Roman soldiers were also favorite targets for their assassinations. The Sicarii usually staged these acts of execution at public functions in order to heighten fear. That Matthew, a former tax collector, and Simon, a former zealot, could be part of the same company of 12 apostles is a testimony of the life-changing power and grace of Christ. It is interesting that the key men in the first and second groups of apostles were originally called at the very outset of Christ's ministry. John 1:35 to 42 describes how Jesus called John and Andrew. They, in turn, on that very same day, brought Peter, who was Andrew's brother, James, the remaining member of the group, who was John's brother. So it was undoubtedly Andrew and John who brought him to Christ, too. In other words, the first group's association with Jesus went back to the very start of his public ministry. John 1:43 to 51 likewise describes the calling of Philip and Nathanael, also known as Bartholomew. They were called the following day, version 43. So that group also had a history that went back to the beginning of Jesus' ministry. These were men who had known Jesus well and followed him closely for a long time. The first person in the first group, the man who became the spokesman and the overall leader of the group, was Simon, whom he also named Peter. Luke 6 to 14. Would you like me to keep going?
Mikey, do you want to read? Thank you, Veer.
Of course.
I got something in my eye, so maybe in a little bit.
Okay, you're good. Yeah, Veer, you can keep going.
All right, sounds good. Simon, also named Peter. Simon was a very common name. There are at least 7 Simons in the Gospel accounts alone. Among the 12 were 2 named Simon, Simon Peter and Simon the Zealot. In Matthew 13:55, Jesus' half-brothers are listed, and one of them was also named Simon. Judas Iscariot's father was called Simon as well. John 6 to 71. Matthew 26 to 6 mentions that Jesus had a Jesus had a meal at home of a man in Bethany named Simon the leper. Another Simon, a Pharisee, hosted Jesus at a similar meal. Luke 7:36 to 40. And the man conscripted to carry and the man conscripted to carry Jesus' cross part way to Calvary was Simon Cyrene. Matthew 27:32. Our Simon's full name at birth was Simon Bar Jonah. Matthew 16 to 17. Meaning Simon, son of Jonah, John 21:15 to 17. Simon Peter's father's name then was John, sometimes rendered Jonas or Jonah. We know nothing about his parents, but notice that the Lord gave him another name. Luke introduces him this way: Simon, whom he also named Peter. Luke 6 to 14. Luke's choice of words here is important. Jesus didn't merely give him a new name to replace the old one. He also named him Peter. This disciple was known sometimes as Simon, sometimes as Peter, and sometimes as Simon Peter. So there's a big differentiation between the name and how they're called. Just a little anecdote. Peter, did you want me to continue?
Yeah. If you wanna, I'll take over. Or unless
I can finish.
say, For sure, yeah, Veer, you can
Of course.
finish.
Peter was a sort of nickname. It means rock. Petros is the Greek word for a piece of rock, a stone. The Aramaic equivalent was Cephas. 1 Corinthians 1 to 12, 3 to 22, 9 to 5, 15 to 5, Galatians 2 to 9. John 1 to 42 describes Jesus' first face-to-face meeting with Simon Peter. Now, when Jesus looked at him, he said, "You are Simon, the son of Jonah. You shall be called Cephas," which is translated as stone, a stone. Those were apparently the first words Jesus ever said to Peter, and from then on, Rock was his nickname. He was the Rock, the original Rock.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me. Could you like specifically explain what you think is like really interesting about that part, if you don't mind? I understand. Like a Pavlovian effect almost. Wait, quick question. Do you know what I meant by what I just said? The Pavlov effect? So that was a study done in Germany, I believe, with dogs who were trained to understand that a click or one of the training bells that they could have been associated with doing the right thing was, yeah, right. So technically, a Pavlovian effect when you're referring to me as Petros, when I'm doing the right, when I'm on the track of Jesus, right? I guess or when I have Jesus in my sight. And then if I'm acting in regards to my worldly or fleshly desires, you could say that it's Peter in that sense, right? Okay. Right. For what I just said, I think specifically for that, it just goes to show that in that sense, I guess you could say that Jesus was ahead of his time. I mean, what else could you say? Like this guy, he navigated how to redirect and correct a behavior within a person that knew his normal shortcomings, I guess you could say. You know? Yeah, So it goes to show that he
Call
was
ends in a minute, by the way. I'll resend it in the chat.
cool. Thank you. It goes to show that he wasn't just on his own timing. He was able to identify everyone else's, you know? Right. Observation is key.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To the other side.